Welcome students. Today we are discussing about Abraham Lincoln's The Gatsby Address. First of all, we should know who was Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln was the 16th President of United States, serving from March 1861 until his assassination in April 1865. He is regarded as one of the Americans' greatest president for his leadership during the Civil War and his efforts to abolish slavery. Born on February 12, 1809, in a log cabin in Kentucky, Lincoln grew up in a low-income family. He largely self-educated himself and became a successful lawyer before entering politics. First, it is important to remember the context. America was in the midst of a bloody civil war. Union troops had only recently defeated Confederate troops at the Battle of Gettysburg. It was the turning point in the war. The stated purpose of Lincoln's speech was to dedicate a plot of a land that would become soldiers' national cemetery. However, Lincoln realized that he also had to inspire the people to continue the fight. Below is the text of Gatsby Address. 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. 7 is much more poetic, much more elegant, much more noble than 87. The United States had won its freedom from Britain 87 years earlier, embarking on the Great Experiment. Lincoln reminds the audience of the founding principles of the country, liberty and equality. In so doing, he sets up his next sentence perfectly. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so convinced and so dedicated can long endure. Lincoln signals the challenge. The nation is under attack. He extends the significance of fight beyond the borders of the United States. It is a question of whether any nation founded on the same principle could survive. Thus does the war, and the importance of winning it take on any even greater significance. Met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is although fitting and proper that we should do this. Lincoln turns to recognize those who have fallen for their country. He uses contrast effectively by stating those who here gave their lives that this nation might live. Lincoln makes what is perhaps the ultimate contrast, life versus death. Lincoln makes what is perhaps the ultimate contrast, life versus death. Contrast is compelling. It creates interest. Communicating an idea juxtaposed with its polar opposite creates energy. Moving back and forth between the contradictory poles encourage full engagement from the audience. This consonance, the repetition of same consonant in short succession through words with the letter F or F, battlefield, field, final for fitting. But in a large sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hollow this ground. Notice the use of tricolon, cannot dedicate, cannot consecrate, cannot hollow. A tricolon is a powerful public speaking technique that can add power to your words and make them memorable. Brave men, living and dead, who struggled here, have consecrated it for above our poor power to add or detract. The sentence is full of solemn respect for those who fought. It is an eloquent way of saying that Their action speaks louder than Lincoln's words. There is an alliteration, poor power. The world will little note, nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. There is a double contrast in this sentence. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. Note the appeal to something larger. It is not the United States that will never forget, but the entire world. Ironically, Lincoln was wrong on this point. Not only do we remember his words to this day, we will continue to remember them in future. It is for us the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the greatest task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full years of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. The final two sentences of the address sounds a call to action, a resolve to complete the unfinished work. They are full of inspirational words such as dedicated, nobly, great, honored, devotion, highly resolved, God, birth, and freedom. There are a couple of contrasts here, the living with the honored death, and these dead shall not have died in vain. With this nation shall have a new birth of freedom. Earlier, Lincoln said that, in a sense, they could not dedicate the ground. Here he tells the audience to dedicate themselves to the unfinished work and the great task remaining before us. He finishes with his famous tricolon of people, by the people, for the people. Repetition is an essential aspect of great public speaking. The trick is knowing what and how to repeat. Take a lesson from Lincoln. Sometimes it's the little words that have the most powerful effect. You can learn a lot about public speaking by studying the great speeches of the history. The Gettysburg Address is one of the greatest. Lincoln took his audience on a journey. It begins with the founding of America and ended at the crossroad. He wanted to make sure that Americans chooses the right path, and he did. Might never deliver a speech or presentation that becomes as famous as Gatsby Address, but we can still make an impact when we speak.